Hey everybody, this is Russ from Retro Game Core. The ROG Ally has been out for about 6 months at this point, and they have a new firmware and software update that is coming out in the next couple days, and I've been beta testing it for the past couple weeks. And so as a result, I want to do a check-in and just talk about maybe a 6-month review of the ROG Ally and what my experience has been like since first getting this device. So in this video, we're going to talk about all the things I like about the ROG Ally and what sets it apart, at least for me. Now, we're also going to talk about some of the things I think can still be improved about it, and whether or not that'll be within this model or a future one that ASUS releases if they do make one. Either way, I think this is going to be a fun video, so grab a snack and drink and let's go ahead and dive in. Okay, to start, let's talk about what the ROG Ally is. Now, this is a handheld Windows-based PC, and it is similar to other devices on the market, like the Steam Deck or even the new Lenovo Legion Go. Now, even though I have reviewed each of those devices, this isn't going to be a comparison video. In the end of the day, I think there's a big difference between the Steam Deck and the ROG Ally. And we'll discuss that more in the end of the video when I talk about my recommendations for the ROG Ally and other devices. Now, there are two different ROG Ally models. There's the Z1 Extreme and then the Z1. And I happen to have both of them, so I have tested each and done review videos as well. Now, you've probably figured it out, but the Z1 Extreme processor within that model is more powerful than the Z1 non-extreme one. And there's a price difference as well. When it comes to retail, it's $699 for the Z1 Extreme. However, of note, over the Black Friday weekend, it went down to $599. And so I think there will probably be future sales like that in the coming months. Another thing of note is that many people have returned their ROG Allies for one reason or another. And so as a result, there are open box options available if you buy it from Best Buy. And so just at a quick glance looking on Best Buy, I actually found a bunch of models for $499, and that's a pretty great deal considering it's $200 cheaper than the retail price. Now, the Z1 is a little bit cheaper. It is $599 retail, but over Black Friday it was $429. And similarly, the open box prices are pretty low as well, $325. And considering that this is a full-fledged PC, it's pretty impressive that we're getting something at that price. Now, like I mentioned, I've already reviewed both of these devices, and between the two, I would 100% recommend the Z1 Extreme. And there's a couple reasons for it. Number one, the graphics processing is a lot better on that one. So if you're going to be playing PC games, especially those that are GPU intensive, you're going to have a much better time on the Z1 Extreme. In addition, I found the Z1 Extreme to be more efficient as a chipset, which means that you can use it at a lower power profile and still get some really good performance compared to the Z1. And that essentially means that you'll get better battery life playing the same game between the two models. So anyway, yes, that's what the ROG Ally is. It's a Windows-based handheld machine, and I recommend the Z1 Extreme over the other. And if you don't mind taking a little bit of a risk by getting an open box copy, which still, has warranty and all that, then I definitely would recommend that if it's available for you. Next, I want to talk about some of the software updates that are coming to Armoury Crate. That's the front-end software that is made for the ROG Ally. And this kind of works as a band-aid in that it hides some of those crazy Windows functions you don't want to have on a handheld and gives you a more console-like experience. Either way, as I'm showing off the software, you're going to see a watermark that says that it's a beta release. But of course, when the stable release comes out in a couple days, this isn't going to be happening at all. Now, as just a really quick overview, the game library is where I spend most of my time when I am in Armoury Crate. This is going to show a listing of all the games that are installed on this device across a bunch of different platforms. So my Steam games, Xbox games, GOG, and so on. And you can also add individual apps. For example, I have things like Chiaki for PS5 game streaming, and then I could launch directly into the Xbox or Steam apps, or even EmuDeck for emulation. Now, none of this is actually new. This is just how Armoury Crate works. So let's move over and talk about some of the updates since my last video. Number one, let's talk about the command center, which is kind of their quick menu. Within here, you can customize all of these different buttons, but these are the 9 that I use the most. Now, some of these are still pretty standard. You can change your power mode to give it a different TDP and also your control style. But a couple others have had some changes. For example, the real-time monitor now has 3 different options. And 2 of these are actually now horizontal bars, which means they're not going to take up much screen real estate, but you can still see a lot of the stats if you want. The smallest one is called minimal, then they have one called row, and then they've also got their standard one they've had before, which they call square. And any of these can be moved around wherever you would like on the screen at any time. They've also changed out the resolution options. Now you have, in addition to 1080p and 720p, 900p. And this is a great middle ground if you have something that doesn't play quite perfectly with 1080p, but 720p might look a little bit too fuzzy for you. Now, in terms of refresh rate, there's no change here. You can swap between 60 and 120 Hz. They've also fine-tuned the FPS limiter, so that's going to limit the frames per second anywhere from 30 to 45 to 60 to 90 to 120 frames per second. Another update is they've added a CPU boost option. previously you had to go into the registry editor and actually change it yourself. And so now you can turn this on or off with the tap of a button. And this is going to be good if you're playing a game that doesn't require a lot of CPU power, but you still want to save as much energy as possible. And my friend the Fox just did a video yesterday about this new firmware update, and so I'll leave that link down below because he does give a couple demonstrations, and it does look pretty great. In fact, in his example, he got about a 6-watt power savings. That's about 15% right then and there just by tapping that button. Of course, it's really going to depend on the game, and it's not going to be the best when it comes to emulation, but all the same, I love the fact that we have that choice and you can get it right here in the control center. Another option I've always enjoyed but has always been there is the ability to turn off the embedded controller. And that's really handy if you're going to be docking the device and maybe the game is only picking up on the onboard controls, but you want to use a different controller. And finally, there's an option to end task. This will basically close out of that Windows program, be it a game or anything else, and immediately kill it. And so that's really handy because Windows can be wonky sometimes when trying to quit something. And finally, the last feature that's been added to this new software update is gyroscopic controls. Now, this is something you could use with third-party apps previously, but now we have it baked inside of Armoury Crate. And it's very easy to set up and calibrate. In fact, in the settings, you can go into the calibration options, and there's an option for gyro right here at the end. Now, personally, my gyro controls were working fine right out of the box, but if you want to calibrate them, it's very easy to do it right here. Now, the way that you set this up is on a per-game basis within Armoury Crate. So what you want to do is hover over your game in the game library, press the X button to bring up the game-specific menu. Within here, you've got all sorts of options you can make changes to, including like your button controls and power profiles and everything else. However, there's now a gyro settings option, and you can set the gyro to mimic either a mouse movement or a left analog stick or right analog stick. In this example, I'm going to use right analog stick with Destiny 2. Now, if you'd like, you can now set a button to enable the gyro, or just have it on constantly. And you have a ton of different options here, but I'm going to use the left trigger. This means that when I press and hold the left trigger like I'm aiming down the sights, it's now going to turn on the gyroscopic controls so that I can aim a little bit better with motion controls. On top of that, you have a couple different configurations, like you can invert the axes if you're crazy like me, and you can also adjust the sensitivity and the dead zones. Anyway, once you've set that up, you're good to go. Now when you launch the game through Armoury Crate, it's now going to embed all of those gyroscopic controls. And so here's an example. I'm going to press and hold the left trigger, and then I can move the controller around, and as you can see, it's also aiming. Now on the Steam Deck, they have even better motion controls, but still, this is the best I've ever seen on a Windows handheld. I love the fact that you can make per game configurations. And I have to say that for Destiny 2, one of my favorite games to play on this device, I found it to work really well. In general, I'm still using the right analog stick to move around and to aim, but when I want to do that fine-tuning aim, like just a little bit to make sure I get that headshot, it works out really well. So I think this is a feature that I'm going to use on quite a few games here going forward. Okay, so those are the major changes, at least for me, when it comes to the software update that's coming in a couple days, and I'm sure they'll have a big change log when it actually releases. Now I want to move over and talk about some of the reasons why I like the ROG Ally so much. And I think first and foremost, we need to talk about the screen. There's a few things I really like about it. Number one, we have a 120 Hz refresh rate, and that obviously means you'll be able to play games at 120 Hz, but there are some other really neat features to it, including something called black frame insertion, which we'll talk about here later in the video. Now, the other thing that goes part and parcel with this screen is that it has variable refresh rate, and it also supports FreeSync. Essentially what that means is that if you're playing a game and it's going up and down in terms of the frame rate, it's not really that big of a deal. It actually is still a very smooth experience when playing on the ROG Ally. If you try any other device and it's kind of going around like a yo-yo like that, you can definitely feel that change in frames per second. With variable refresh rate, it just kind of makes it all seamless. Now, another thing I like about the screen is that it looks really sharp. It's a 1080p display, but then also it has this nice anti-reflective quality to it. In fact, I just recently did a video where I compared the OLED Steam Deck models, the glossy and the etched glass, and I found that the ROG Ally screen kind of made those look worse. It had a higher resolution, so everything was nice and sharp, but then also the anti-reflective properties just made it look really nice. Now, this is an LCD panel. It's not even OLED, but all the same, I think it's one of the best LCD panels I've ever seen. Another thing I really appreciate about the ROG Ally is the audio. Now, I don't think it's the absolute best audio I've ever heard in a handheld. I still actually prefer the Steam Deck audio. I know a lot of people think I'm crazy for thinking that, but all the same, I did want to make a note that the audio is very good on this device. It has front-firing speakers. It's very immersive when you're using it, and so that is big kudos right there. Additionally, this is still the second most comfortable handheld I've ever used. I can play it for hours at a time. It's lightweight, it just feels really comfortable to use. Those triggers are so much fun to use as well. I just really do enjoy this experience. I think the analog sticks are nice and smooth. Some people have issues with the dead zones, but I never have. And so I really enjoy the controls on this. I still think the Steam Deck's a little bit better, but all the same, it's like going from an A to an A- or an A+ to an A. These are both really good controls, and I think the ROG Ally is the best, at least when it comes to Windows handhelds. Another thing I like is just the Armory Crate experience. It does a really good job of kind of masking all of the weird things that happen within Windows, and so it gives you a very console-like quality. Now, it's not a perfect experience. You're still going to have to go into Windows here and there, use the touchscreen, maybe use the on-screen keyboard, but all the same, it's probably a lot easier on this one than any other Windows handheld I've used before, and so I do appreciate that factor. And it's very obvious that ASUS is continuing to update that software, and they are listening to the community, because most of the major gripes that people have had, they've been addressing them head on. And so I really do appreciate that about the company, in that they are working towards making it better. A lot of the other companies, especially the Chinese-based ones like Neo, they don't really have a good response rate when it comes to people and having their issues. They just happen to put out a new device instead, and hopefully that'll fix some of those problems. I would rather that somebody focus on the software issues at hand and fix that with the device that we already have. Now, another thing that kind of goes part and parcel with the Armory Crate experience is just the power profile. So there's a 15 watt standard power profile available for the device, and that is just my default one. I use that for basically everything. When I'm playing a game that'll go up to 120 Hz, often it'll hit that if it's a lightweight or indie game, but then also if it's a 60 Hz game, it'll do that as well. And so I've always found that to be kind of a plug and play setting, in that I just kind of set it at that and then let it go. And when you combine that with the variable refresh rate, even if you are getting a frame rate that's going up and down, it's not a big deal because it's still a really smooth experience. This is one of those devices where I actually prefer to turn off all the metrics, where I don't want to see the frame rate or any of that kind of stuff. I just want the games to play well, and even without looking at the frames per second, I have a really great time playing these games. Now, another feature I like about the ROG Ally, which is very polarizing, is the fact that you can dock it, and they have a specific external GPU that you can use with it. It's called the XG Mobile. And I did a full review video of this, and so I'm not going to retread a lot of that, but it has really been transformative for me in my own use case. I don't have a lot of space at my home. We live in kind of a cramped house in Hawaii, and so as a result, I don't really have space for a big old desktop. And so I love the idea of using the ROG Ally and the XG Mobile together. And what that means is when I'm out and about, I can just use the ROG Ally as a handheld and play all my games. But when I get home, I can plug it into my little dock, plug in the XG Mobile, and then all of a sudden I have a full desktop class computer, and I don't have to worry about having two different computers, two different sets of files. Everything's just working on my one machine. I bought this little double laptop stand on Amazon, and this has been really helpful. I can put the XG Mobile here, and then when I'm ready, I can throw on the ROG Ally and then put them together, and this is much smaller than a full desktop PC. And the great thing is that when I plug it in like this, I can play a lot of games at a much higher resolution or with better graphics. So most games will play at least 1440p, if not 4K, and still with a pretty stable 60 Hz as well. And so when I'm playing a game on mobile, it's like a different experience, and then I can plug it into my monitor and get that full desktop PC experience as well. And so I've been really enjoying that for several months at this point. Now, there are some downsides to this. Number one, these GPUs are expensive and proprietary. It's not going to work with any other Windows-based handheld. It's only going to work with the ROG Ally and some of the other ASUS laptops that they have. And like I mentioned, they are expensive. So the most high-end model came out earlier this year. It is a 4090 mobile GPU, and this costs about $2,000. I do not own that one. That is crazy. Now, the other models are cheaper. Last year's model is the 6850 XT. This is an AMD mobile GPU. This one's about $799, but I found that it's actually sold out everywhere. I'm not sure what's going on there, but that is kind of disappointing. That is one that I actually bought myself and I did a bunch of testing with. That's what I used in my review video. Now, since then, I've upgraded to the 3080 Ti. That's the 2021 model, and ASUS actually sent that out for review, and so that's why I ended up using that one instead. It's a little bit more powerful than the 6850. Initially, I was having issues with it, but once I updated all the graphics drivers on the ROG Ally, then everything started to work a lot better. Either way, I'm using the 3080 Ti now, and it's been working great. It's about $1,000, so still very expensive, but all the same, it does give me desktop class performance on my computer without having to get a full desktop PC. And because I'm very limited on space, I do really appreciate that, and I use it every day. But of course, I completely understand why people do not like this thing, because it is very much so a one-trick pony. However, for my use case, it is a really good fit. Okay, a few more things that really make the ROG Ally stand out for me. Number one is that it's easily accessible. At least here in the US, I can just go over to Best Buy and pick one up. And the nice thing about that, in addition to just being able to get it the day of, is the fact that you can return it at Best Buy if you don't like it. So that does make it very easily accessible if you just want to try it out and then maybe return it if you're not going to like it. And like I mentioned, there's a lot of open box models because many people had the same idea. And so as a result, if you want to pick up an open box model, you can get it for even cheaper. It's kind of one of those things where the community is helping themselves out by trying it out and then returning it and making it cheaper for the next guy. So I really appreciate that. It's pretty cool. Now, another thing about the ROG Ally that's great is that it's becoming popular, and so as a result we're getting more and more accessories for it. For example, TomTalk, which is one of my favorite case makers, they made an ROG specific case. Previously I was using a hardshell case made by them for the Steam Deck and it was a little bit loose, but this one is super tight. On the outside it has this rugged water resistant texture which I think feels really good, but then inside it's nice and soft. It's like a rabbit inside. And it's got a little pocket for your micro SD cards as well, and it fits the ROG Ally perfectly. And so I've been really enjoying using this one. I'll leave a link to it down below. Another accessory I've been using a lot is this one. It is called the Ally Mate, and this is made by a company called Mechanism. They used to be called Deckmate, but they changed their name because they now support multiple devices. And this essentially is an accessory system, so you can hook this up into your device, and then you can use all sorts of plugins that'll come with it. So for example, a kickstand, or you could hook up like an external battery. There's a lot of things you can do about it. And I made a full review video about this. I'll leave it linked down below as well. And finally, there have also been some third-party buttons available, including these right here from my friend at Sakura Retro Modding. They've been making buttons for retro handhelds for years at this point. They have a big Etsy store, and so you can pick them up there. And I think there's something like $28, but to be honest, I actually planned today to go and put these into one of my ROG Allies. However, as soon as I opened it up, I realized that I was going to have to basically dismantle the whole thing to get inside there. That means I'd have to take out the cooling system and the full PCB because it's not just one little controller module. And so as a result, I kind of got scared off because I'd realized it was going to take me a couple hours to do that. And so we're going to have to save that for a different project. Either way, it's pretty awesome that they have these buttons available. And so if you are interested in upgrading your buttons to a different design and you don't mind really getting into the weeds with your device, then this is what I would recommend. Okay, next I want to talk about black frame insertion. Now this is a feature that's been around for a long time, but it's something that recently came to my attention and I've really been enjoying it with retro gaming. Now in particular, this will only really work when it comes to retro games if you have a panel that's 120 Hz or higher. So for example, this would also work on the Lenovo Legion Go. Either way, when you're playing 60 Hz content, and it can be emulated games or PC games, what it does is it puts a black frame in between each of the other frames. That's why you need 120 Hz, because it needs to do that in order to run the 60 Hz game itself. And essentially this is mimicking the same phenomenon that happened on CRT televisions. What that means is it'll look a lot like a CRT when you're playing it that way. And it's really hard to explain in a video here, but let me show you a couple demonstrations. So right here is just me playing Super Mario World at a regular 60 Hz refresh rate. And this is probably what you're used to seeing just overall. Now there's an option within RetroArch to turn on black frame insertion, but I found that it can be a little bit unpredictable with the ROG Ally. Instead, I've just been using a really lightweight app that you just open up. It's an exe file, and it'll turn on black frame insertion with your 120 Hz panel. And so this is a look at Super Mario World with black frame insertion on. You're probably not seeing any sort of difference right here. It's not something that my camera can pick up on, and I don't think you'll be able to see it through YouTube anyway. Essentially, all you're going to see is a black bar moving up slowly. And that's just an artifact of the way that I'm filming this right now, which is at 4K, but at 60 frames per second. And it's really hard to explain what this is without actually showing it to you. So it's one of those things you have to see to believe. But essentially, it makes it a lot more of a smooth experience, especially when you're playing scrolling games. And I found in particular, when it comes to old school retro games, it makes a world of difference. Now, it doesn't have to be CRT-based games specifically. Even handheld systems like PSP and Game Boy Advance, these also still look really good. In fact, you can also play PC games like this. This is not limited to emulation. However, bear in mind that if you're susceptible to flickering, for example with an old CRT monitor, if you used to get headaches, that same thing will happen right here. But for me personally, I don't notice that at all with the naked eye, and so it does improve the experience for me significantly. So let me show you an example here, playing them side by side. On the left, we just have it running at 120 Hz, but with the 60 Hz content. And then on the right, I have black frame insertion on. And as I jump with Donkey Kong, you probably can't see a difference at all here. However, I'm going to slow everything down, so now everything's running at a 10% speed. And what you want to do here is watch the bottom of the feet of the rhinoceros when he's jumping up, and then same thing, watch when Donkey Kong is starting to jump down. You'll see a little bit of blur on the left side. Meanwhile, on the right side, it is crisp and clear no matter what. And so that's one of the big advantages here, is that it reduces motion blur. And as a result, everything looks super smooth as you're playing it. So if you have an ROG Ally or a Lenovo Legion Go, anything that can play at 120 Hz, even your computer monitor, I would recommend trying this out for retro game emulation. And it's pretty amazing that we can do this on the ROG Ally with the help of just one tiny little app. And here's a great example. This is Super Mario World, but the widescreen version, so it's taking up the full 16:9, so it's like a ridiculous widescreen version of this classic game. And I'm also running it with black frame insertion, and it looks amazing as I'm playing it. This is something that's so far beyond what it used to be back in the day, but man, I still really enjoy it, and it's pretty awesome that we can do that on the ROG Ally. So in a nutshell, those are all the things that I really like about the ROG Ally, and why I keep going back to it as my main Windows PC. But of course, there are a few things that could be improved, and some of these things could probably be fixed in software, but other ones will probably have to wait for a future release. Now, when it comes to this specific model, there are two little nitpicks that I have. Number one is the brightness of the RGB lights around the analog sticks. Personally, I love having these RGB lights, but I think they're a little bit too bright on the lowest setting. You actually only have 4 different options. You have off, 33%, 66%, and 100. And so generally, I just play it at 33%, but I found that to be too bright when in a low light environment. So I'd love for this to be in 10% increments, because I think like 10 or 20% would be just perfect. Another thing I think could be improved upon is the micro SD card issue. If you're not familiar with it, basically what happened is with the early releases of the ROG Ally, many people had issues with their micro SD card slots burning up. And we never really got a definitive answer what's going on here, but many people lost SD cards that got corrupted because of this, or just the slot stopped working altogether. On my first review unit, it actually broke completely. I wasn't able to read any cards, so I sent it back to ASUS for forensic evidence, and they went and they did all their poking and prodding, and they sent me a new one. Now, unfortunately, I didn't put an SD card in that one for a couple of weeks. I was doing a bunch of testing, and by the time I put a micro SD card inside, that one also wouldn't read the card either. So I've had 2 for 2 when it comes to broken micro SD card slots. Now, these were very early units, and I've been told that they fixed this problem now, so any of the new ones that you buy are a lot less prone to actually having this happen. And if you do have this problem, you can send yours to ASUS for free, and they'll fix it up or send you a new one back. Now, I do appreciate the fact that they found the fix for it and they are able to repair your device, but all the same, it's a bit of a bummer that it happened in the first place. And then the second one is that they didn't extend the warranty on all of the ROG Allies. It has a 1-year warranty, which I think is pretty fair, but all the same, I think that they should extend it for micro SD card issues in particular. I think that 18 months or 24 months just makes a lot more sense. That way, if you have one of those early units and you kind of treat it like a ticking time bomb, at least you'll have the comfort of knowing that you'll be covered for 18 or 24 months instead. So I think it's a little thing in the fact that I wish that they would extend that warranty a little bit for micro SD card issues, and that is something the company themselves could do with basically no repercussion. Now, the other two things I don't like about the ROG Ally that I wish were fixed, I don't think can be fixed in this model. Number one is going to be the battery life. So this is a 40 watt-hour battery, same size as the Steam Deck, but the Steam Deck is a lot more efficient when it comes to low power gaming. And so as a result, the Steam Deck does give you better battery life. Basically, when you really try to push the ROG Ally, you can get about an hour of gameplay, and then just on an average kind of use case where you're not pushing it too hard, you're going to get about 2 hours altogether. Now, it's not the end of the world. It actually is a fast charger, and so because of that, you can plug it in and charge it really quickly, or of course, you can plug it in while playing, and that's also going to alleviate that. And so down the line, I hope that they can improve the battery life by either giving it a bigger battery or using a more efficient chip as they get developed. Now, the other thing I don't like about the ROG Ally are the face buttons. They are what I call clacky. So they have a little bit of play to them. That means the button will wiggle left and right if you move it. And when you're playing a game, especially those that you push down on buttons a lot, like Hades, it gives you kind of a clacky experience. And so I don't really like that feeling. I wish it was just a little bit tighter in the shell. That way it was a tighter experience. I think that the Steam Deck does this really well. And I think that other console controllers like the Xbox and PlayStation are also very good in that regard. Anyway, that's a real quick summary of the things that I like and I don't like about the ROG Ally. And so let's start wrapping up and talk about my recommendations and my my own personal use case. And we'll start with my own personal use case. So I've been playing a lot of lightweight PC games. A lot of this has to do with the fact that the battery life is going to be a lot better because it's not so demanding. And so as a result, it just doesn't give me as much battery anxiety. On top of that, those games will play at 120 Hertz, which always looks awesome. And then the other side is that I do play a fair bit of emulation. Now, I don't play a lot of retro games on this. I usually will use a retro device for that. But all the same, some of the high-end stuff, so like Nintendo Switch, Nintendo Wii U emulation, those have been really great on here too. In addition, the Z1 Extreme chip is very good when it comes to PS3 emulation. This thing can basically play any PS3 game you can throw at it. In fact, over this past weekend, I finally got God of War 3 working. I had to dump my disc and then do all the decrypting stuff that you have to do to make it work. But once I got it working, it's pretty incredible. It's not a perfect experience. It's not like at 60 frames per second, but all the same, I would consider this to be playable. There's a few graphical artifacts here and there, but this does make me want to replay that game altogether. Just bear in mind that you have to pump a lot of power to make God of War 3 work on this device, and so it's going to chew through that battery in about an hour. So this is one where it's probably going to be better to play it docked or at least plugged in. Now let's talk about recommendations, and as a caveat, this is 100% subjective, so this is just my opinion, and you are welcome to have your own. Now, the thing is, the Steam Deck versus the ROG Ally is usually one of the bigger concerns people have, and I did a whole video about that comparing the two, and a lot of those factors still really stand today. It's a little bit different now because the OLED Steam Deck just makes a lot of improvements that weren't there in my initial review, and so I still do prefer the Steam Deck even when it was an LCD panel, but now it's even better with the OLED one. So here's the way I look at it. Number one, if you want a very console-like experience, for example, the ability to just go into the Steam store, pick up a game, and start playing it, and have the kind of Nintendo Switch interface, then I think the Steam Deck is going to be the best in that regard. Now, there are some limitations here. For example, Game Pass does not work on the Steam Deck. In addition, there are certain games that just don't work. Fortnite, Call of Duty, Destiny 2. If you want to play those games specifically, then you're going to want to get a Windows-based handheld. And when it comes to those, the ROG Ally is my favorite for all the reasons that I just explained. Now, other people enjoy other devices. For example, the Lenovo Legion Go is one that a lot of people are enjoying right now. This one has the exact same chipset, but with a bigger screen and a bigger battery and detachable controls. And so there's a lot of features that you might prefer with the Legion Go. For me personally, I like something a little bit more compact and lightweight, and so the ROG Ally works really well for me. So the way I see it, if you want a console-like experience overall, then the Steam Deck is going to be your best bet. But if you want the most console-like Windows experience, I think the ROG Ally and its Armoury Crate software actually gives you the best experience. And if you have access to a Best Buy, then I do recommend picking one up, testing it out, and if you don't like it, no harm, no foul, you can bring it right back. By the way, the same thing is available with the Legion Go, so you can go to Best Buy or even Micro Center and pick that up, and then test it out and see if it's going to be a good fit for you. And given the fact that these are very expensive handhelds, I think it's pretty awesome that you can try it out and have an easy return process if it's not a good fit. And finally, my last recommendation is that if you're not in a rush to buy any of these handhelds, then I would say just wait, because the longer you wait, the cheaper they're going to be. I think that both Lenovo and ASUS are going to create future revisions of these devices as the years move on. And so as a result, you'll probably see some of these devices like the original ROG Ally going on clearance at some point, so you'll be able to pick it up for cheaper. And you never know, the next revision might be even better in many regards. And so it's always better to wait if you're not in a rush, because if you don't spend the money now, you can probably get a better value later. Anyway, that's really about all I had to say about the ROG Ally in my 6-month review, and let me know what you think in the comments down below. Did you pick one of these up? Are you one of the people that returned them? Or do you still have yours, and are you enjoying it, and why? As always, thank you for watching, and be sure to like and subscribe if you found this helpful, and we will see you next time. Happy gaming.